Hi, everybody. This is Mike Anderson with iTrade Network. Thank you for joining our webcast today on Beyond Breaking Even, calculating the ROI of modernizing your procurement process. It's a pretty long title, but we're going to try to keep things reasonably short today. In respect for your time, I think we have about 45 minutes allocated. We won't go beyond that, but we think we'll probably use close to that full amount. I'm your host today. My name is Mike Anderson. I am the VP of our Sales Solutions Group at iTrade. And essentially what that means is I'm a product expert across our platform. And joining me today is Brett Paduch, our CFO. Brett?
Thanks, Mike. Look forward to presenting what we have in store for you today. I run our finance organization, but I also, our onboarding team actually reports into me as well. But look forward to the presentation. Thank you, Mike.
Awesome. And what I like about this, well, like and don't like, is you can tell by both our pictures that those were taken pre-pandemic. We both look a lot younger. And secondly, as you can tell, I do this a lot because I have kind of a formal headshot, whereas Brett is a special guest today to present the calculations behind the ROI. So, his picture is maybe a little bit less what you normally see at an event like this. Now, in respect for everybody's time, right, your lines are muted, so any questions that you might have, you can't just pose them verbally, but you can use the Q&A pane down in Zoom. Please submit them. Normally, we like to take these as they come in, or at least where they make sense as they come in. But in this case, we are going to hold them until the end, just to see how much time we have left. But please submit them. If we don't get a chance to answer them live, we will get back to you either via email or just directly communicating. So we will make sure that all questions do get a response today. Our agenda, so what we intend to cover in this up to 45 minutes are really 4 major points and then a Q&A at the end. And I'm going to start by talking about the landscape that exists today with, specifically an eye towards technology and where technology comes into play and where technology can help. Then I'm going to hand it over to Brett, and he's going to talk about the cost calculator, the ROI calculations, a little bit about what potential savings are there, how you can maybe defray some of those manual costs. And then I'm going to pick it up again to kind of walk through some ideas about how to make it happen. And then at the end, we will wrap up with that Q&A piece. So without further ado, when we talk about that technological landscape, I think it really gets divided out into maybe a competitive landscape, and then really the importance of that technological innovation. And we know we have a mixed audience today. We have some folks that are on the buy side. We have some folks that are on the supply side. Technology is relevant for all of us, right? It's changing the way we do business, and we need to change with it or we're going to fall behind. But if we talk about those two segments separately, on the buy side, it's very clear to everyone that it has been changing for years, right? So Amazon has come in and really put an e-commerce spin on fresh perishables procurement, for instance. If we look at Walmart on the other side, they've really come in and used technology to innovate on the supply chain side of the business, right? So mandating palletized ASNs and traceability information for a lot of their high value products, right? Trying to change their image in the marketplace, but they've been at the forefront of that for several years now. In addition, or maybe the driver for that initial change to a more technological approach was really on kind of coming into an industry that had maybe lagged a little bit in adopting technology. There was still a traditional brick and mortar distribution network and retail method for getting fresh perishables specifically out to customers. So that was kind of the opportunity that existed in our space 5+ years ago. But what we've really seen in the last year is that COVID has completely accelerated the necessity of starting to adopt technology, right? So if we look at last year in 2020, everybody on the buy side was either crazy up, right? Record years in terms of retail business and not being able to keep up with demand and trying to find new supply. Or on the food service side, down, some of our food service customers and contacts were down maybe 80% year over year, right? So there was a complete disequilibrium. You're either trying to keep up or you were trying to survive. But what came out of that was a real transformation for the whole space digitally, right? So all of a sudden you've got people, self-stating that they made 5 years of technological advancement in 1 year, working with non-traditional trading partners, getting more creative with their sourcing, right? The importance of flexibility and communication, not even mentioning a lot of the regulatory pressure, FSMA 204, bioengineering disclosure, Safe Food for Canadians Act, tons and tons of pressure amplified, ramped up last year in 2020. Now, the supply side of that is super interesting to me because, the buyers oftentimes are the ones leading this technological innovation because they're the ones that are essentially making the decision about how they're going to conduct a trade. And the supplier wants to be available to get the business, right? So what we saw on the supply side was that as buyers were upgrading their technology, they're choosing suppliers that can meet them there, right? They're choosing suppliers that are also adopting technology because otherwise the buying entity is saying, hey, we're optimizing our half of this equation about how we procure. But if the suppliers aren't there, you're not optimizing the entire puzzle, right? You're only working on one parameter. And then the other piece is that as you see an adoption of technology, what that also does is it creates a bigger and bigger appetite for data. So many of you folks in the supply side are still, doing manual POs, right? Which means it's not digitized, which means it isn't a source of data for analytics and insights. We're doing manual ASNs or even trying to do manual palletized ASNs if you even can keep up with that, right? Doing manual invoicing. But there's that appetite now on the buy side. So no, that won't work for us anymore because for us to really, maximize our efficiency, we need that as data, and we don't want to be paying people to enter it as data, right? So that's a huge change that is started last year really aggressively, but needs to still flow through the space more. And then last, I think of it as the always demanding more, right? So better collaboration, better communication techniques, better methods for working with our trading partners. And that's something that we really saw ourselves at Itrade last year in 2020. We had 4 times our typical volume of suppliers that were joining our network to be able to collaborate and trade electronically with their buyers. So, that has really started that sea change, and we expect it to continue. But it isn't just Itrade, right? That is seeing that or is talking about that. You guys, I know many of you are FMI members, and we're probably at the conference this year. But one of the key messages there was that whole sea change about the importance of embracing technology. And there were a few key points, and this was mainly aimed at the retailer side, but it's about expense control, and that's where we're mainly going to be focusing in today's webinar. But it's also about being able to better adapt to the changes that we're seeing, right? So we had this huge imbalance between winners and losers in 2020, but how well you won or how much you lost really came back in a lot of ways to how flexible you were, right? So how diversified you were in your supplier base, as an example. And that means, building that crisis-proof supply chain, and then ultimately, being able and ready to step up and, deal with those challenges as they raise their heads. Hopefully we don't have another 2020. I think even those of us who really did really well in 2020 don't want to go through the experience, that it took to get there. We learned a lot, but the lessons were sometimes painful lessons. But what I will leave here though is that embracing technology is something that we see pretty globally across the large players, right? So large retail organizations are investing a lot in capital and in technology. I think we all kind of understand that, but those of us attending today aren't all large players in the space. And even if you don't have the resources of the large companies, smaller buyers, smaller suppliers have huge advantages in terms of nimbleness and the ability to adapt to change, and ultimately, have the most to gain in terms of, percentage growth and starting to grab additional market share. So we'll talk about some of the techniques later in the day that you can leverage to help keep up with that. And then my last point before tossing it to Brett is, if we take that general message about adopting technology and I think distill it down to its core essence, what FMI was really saying is, collaboration is key. And collaboration means something specific, but it also has a lot of other benefits that come as a result of that, right? So collaboration is about communication and it's about responsiveness. But if you have that collaborative capability, to communicate well. It means that you have more flexibility in making changes. You have an infrastructure that can adapt to additional suppliers, or maybe start selling to different customers and not just selling on the supply side to cruise lines, right? Or not just selling through the food service channel, as an example. Once you have that, then as an outcome, you end up with resilience in your supply chain. And then the last piece, that end-to-end visibility, is how this whole thing becomes a feedback loop. And if you have a good collaborative supply chain that is digitized, that is capturing all of the inputs, capturing the activity, capturing the data that goes along with all the activity, then what you have is you have an end-to-end view into every step of your supply chain that you can then start to analyze, start to draw insights from, and ultimately start turning those insights into new operational practices that keep you at the very successful side, of even things as unexpected as a global pandemic. All right, that's my spiel, kind of just trying to set the stage about why these things are important. Now I'm going to hand it off to Brett, and what Brett's going to really talk about is that, yeah, transformation has a cost associated with it. There are changes that are involved, but so does not changing. And he'll walk us through the model and hopefully get us all thinking about how, this isn't really a question of how can you afford to change. It's the question of really, can you afford not to change the way that you're operating today? So Brett, I'll hand it over.
All right. Thanks, Mike. Okay, so let's dive into this cost model that we'll run through today. If you are looking to be impressed by a sophisticated and complex financial model, I'm afraid to say you'll be disappointed with this. At iTrade Network, we like to keep things simple for our customers, and that includes everything from how we market our platform and then ultimately deliver that platform to our customers. The cost model that I'll walk you through today is intuitive, it's transparent, and it's easy to follow. You shouldn't have to be a finance whiz to understand return on investment models that are critical to your evaluation of a SaaS solution, so integral to your supply chain. Our model is intentional in only showing the direct labor cost buying organizations incur by using manual processes for their order management needs. The return on investment, considering direct input labor cost alone, are enough to prove that embracing a digital, configured, and collaborative order management system is the right thing for your business. Annual compensation information, including salary and benefits such as employer taxes and healthcare costs, were taken directly from salary.com. From there, median compensation for these two processing roles were divided by the total available labor hours in a year, taking into account 2 weeks paid vacation and 10 paid holidays to arrive at a labor rate per available hour, working hour. Each buying organization is different, including compensation for these roles. The great thing about our model is that you can easily input the labor cost per hour that is specific to your organization. Okay, slide 11. For purposes of our illustrative scenario, we are assuming this medium or mid-market enterprise buying organization issues 40,000 purchase orders annually, and each purchase order includes 6 line items or SKUs on average. Each buying organization's facts and circumstances, including PO composition, will vary. And the great thing, again, about our cost model is that items shaded in yellow can easily be adjusted to fit your organization's specific facts and circumstances. Throughout the illustrative cost model scenario presented today, we will keep constant the assumption that 40,000 POs are processed annually with an average of 6 line items on each purchase order. Okay, so because our model is focused on direct labor cost only, we have identified 3 main cost elements that every buying organization incurs. The first cost element listed is straightforward. The second cost element, which is vendor management, is a key series of events that involves someone shepherding a PO through negotiation with the vendor on price and quantity. Additionally, this process involves a high level of vendor collaboration to ensure that the vendor has received the purchased order, acknowledged it, and ultimately managed by the buyer to have the order to ensure it's shipped accurately, on time, and to the right location. The third element, AP and reconciliation, includes manually receiving an invoice, vouchering it into accounts payable, making sure items purchased, received, and invoiced are accurate, and ultimately processing the payment itself. I can't speak for you. Back in my audit days, the reconciliation process was always rife with errors and challenges with resolving the magnitude of unreconciled items purchase order line item level. Because many companies do not have integrated and configured workflows directly with their suppliers, the process is extremely manual, time consuming, and worse, prone to error, not to mention the headaches for both the accounting team and other complexities are involved, such as third-party freight carriers, PO sourcing, and value-add processes. However, because they are very unique to each buying organization, we have determined to not include the cost for these items in the interest of maintaining simplicity. All right, diving into the detailed assumptions underlying the PO creation cost element. You can see we have accounted for two discrete activities that result in direct labor cost. This includes the procurement analyst creating individual line items on a purchase order and ultimately sending completed POs to the vendor. The number of items on a purchase order, that is SKUs, G10s, or any other nomenclature that's used by a buying organization, it directly impacts the labor cost to process it. For example, a purchase order with one line item is much simpler and easier to create and process than a purchase order with 10 line items. In our model, we have assumed it takes approximately 30 seconds to create a purchase order line item. This includes identifying and selecting a vendor from a pre-populated list, inputting it, or selecting the SKU or G10 to be ordered, and then inputting the quantity necessary. For purposes of our model, we assume the buying organization is creating POs directly in its ERP system, so there is no additional time required for dual entry. However, if you have separate systems that are not integrated with one another or are still writing POs out by hand outside of your ERP system, there should be additional direct costs your buying organization is incurring that we haven't included in this model. Once the PO is created, it needs to be sent to the supplier. For purposes of this analysis, we are assuming that the buying organization is exporting the PO to PDF, attaching it to an email, and emailing it to the customer. However, we are aware that there are still buying organizations out there that are still faxing or phoning them into their trading partner. Therefore, we have assumed buyer organizations are spending approximately 5 minutes on average to ultimately send the PO to the customer. As you can see, the manual processing of getting a PO to a supplier is laden with inefficiencies. Using iTradeNetwork's order management system, this activity is done with the click of a button, literally. Because every buying organization's overhead structure is unique, we have intentionally avoided allocating overhead costs such as review and supervision time, things like rent, utilities, and corporate G&A. Our model is intended to show how significant the direct labor processing costs alone are in a manual order management process. So moving on to slide 14. So now the purchase order has been sent, but now the real pain and manual process begins with the buying organization's manual order management process. How do we know this? Because we've had in-depth conversation with hundreds of buying organizations over the years, and in our proposal and blueprinting phase with these customers, we've identified consistent pain points experienced by these buying organizations until they converted to Itrade Network. Collaboration with your vendors is critical to ensuring that items provided on your purchase order are ultimately received by the vendor and confirmed in advance that the quantities and SKU orders are being shipped on time and to the correct destination. Stockouts, wrong SKUs shipped, or products shipped to the wrong DC or cross dock are punitive to your business and cost you time, money, and most importantly, and worse off, lost revenue. Trying to handle your vendor collaboration manually over the phone or email is painful and laden with errors, and anytime a substitution or a change order is required, it requires that the buyer has the operating discipline to remember to manually go back into their ERP system and create the change order and then resend it to the vendor. Our order management system prides itself on being the leading platform for perishable goods, which is the most time sensitive and complex procurement process within a buying organization, not to mention the most profitable product category when I think of perimeter of store. The procurement process for perishables requires significant levels of buyer and vendor collaboration and is laden with substitutions and change orders as harvest dates are subject to change and timing of yields is unpredictable. Not only can you get the vendor collaboration tools and workflow you need with your perishable suppliers on our network, but for all food and beverage categories. Okay, moving on to slide 15. Managing those PO changes takes time. And when done via email, phone calls, text, or other non-contextual methods, it interrupts a buyer's day and productivity. In our conservative model, we assume just 10 minutes per PO is used for negotiation and confirmation. That estimate is certainly low because each change requires not just one brief communication with the buyer's trading partner, but often involves back and forth about options for substitutions, including researching possible alternative sources. And then if one is located, hopefully the buyer remembers to get back to the original trading partner to cancel the PO, which itself is a manual process. Even in the best case scenario, once the new items are agreed to by both parties, the original PO needs to be pulled back up and resolved. Failures in any of these steps, which are common in any manual collaboration process, ultimately will result in discrepancies between the PO, goods received, and the invoice, which we'll account for later in our model. But before we get to that, there's one other major manual process to consider: PO expediting. Buyers know what they have purchased and the expected delivery date, but that product doesn't always get there on time by itself. To make sure it does, or just to set the buyer's mind at ease, this involves the buyer tracking POs versus shipments. In a manual buying process, there isn't an automatic notification from the trading partner when a product is shipped. So buyers are tracking the order and shipment dates on sticky notes or whiteboards or elaborate spreadsheets and calling and emailing suppliers to make sure something is shipped. If that sticky note slips behind the desk or the cleaning staff erases the whiteboard, loads can be lost, late, or even lost completely. All of that follow-up takes time, which is why we have estimated this effort at 10 minutes per purchase order. But in reality, this often takes more time. All right, we arrived at the last cost element considered in our direct cost model. Okay, so now the POs have been submitted, goods have been shipped and received, and it's now time for the buyer's AP team to voucher and reconcile supplier invoices. In a manual process, the AP team receives invoices manually via mail, email, or even still through fax. Because the buyer is not trading on Itrade Network, the AP team has its work cut out for it. The invoice must be manually input and vouchered into accounts payable, line item by line item, including quantity, SKU, cost per unit, and extended cost. We are estimating this takes the AP processor 30 seconds per line item. So the vendor invoice is finally manually vouchered into the AP system. Now the real pain begins. Because the supplier collaboration was done manually and outside of the PO system, there are going to be quite a few discrepancies between the PO quantity, invoice quantity, and received quantity. The good old three-way match is being executed manually. Take, for example, the buyer may have manually negotiated a different price or changed a quantity on an order after the initial PO was sent, but the supplier didn't adjust their invoice to reflect the change. Or maybe the supplier adjusted the invoice, but the buyer forgot to update the PO in the ERP system. Or better yet, the buyer may have phoned in an entire order and forgot to create a PO in the first place. All sorts of scenarios occur without a structured and configured digital workflow that create a mismatch between the PO, invoice, and receipt. For each one, the AP team has to spend significant time investigating the root cause to make sure the buyer is not overpaying. Our model estimates 30 minutes per error, and that each error is corrected 100% accurately. But we know that we're baking in a factor, not baking in a factor for overpaying on invoices, which does happen, particularly with manual reconciliation process. The 5% error rate assumed in our model is based on case studies performed with buying organizations before they joined Itrade Network. Over the years, we have done deep dive case studies with buying organizations during the discovery phase of our sales process to better understand just how pervasive this issue is for them before migrating to our platform. Note, if your buying organization has seen better success on this front and not as high of an error rate, our model allows you to make this adjustment. Okay, so in slide 17, in this summary, we have pulled the cost estimates for each of the 3 cost elements into a final summary, which shows that the illustrative buying organization that processes 40 POs annually is paying a little over $1 million per year for direct labor cost for their order management activities. Based on compensation data previously disclosed, this approximates 15.6 headcount fully devoted to manual PO processing, collaboration, and AP vouchering and reconciliation. This comes out to ultimately $25 per purchase order. We're confident that this actually understates the real cost based on customer feedback. Our pre-converted customers have told us that the average cost is somewhere closer to $50 per PO, but you can input your own assumption to come up with an estimate more in line with your buying organization. Okay, so savings with Itrade Network. So we're confident that using a digital configured workflow that enables real-time collaboration to be captured, you can easily reduce your manual labor cost by over 50%. This would mean a guaranteed payback period of less than a year, significantly reducing administrative labor costs. When considering retailers and food service distributors pre-pandemic were at 3 to 4% operating margins and holding fixed operating costs constant, every $100,000 in variable cost savings is equivalent to generating about 2.5 to 3.3 million in organic revenue. So with that, I'll pause and turn it over to Mike.
Awesome. Thanks, Brett, for running through all that. You know, as you mentioned, your experience may vary, right? So what we will do is there are some questions. I said I was going to take them at the end. I'm going to take a couple now. There have been some questions coming in about will we share that cost model so you can actually run your own inputs? Yes, we will, right? So enter your own numbers and see what you come up with for results.
Mike, I'd like to say it's a proprietary model, but unfortunately, it's not. It's as simple as it gets. And I wish it was, in my mind, it was some sophisticated high-flying model, but it is very basic.
But I think there's benefit to that, right? And one of the reasons why we wanted to keep it very simple is what I'm going to touch on in these next couple points, right? Is what we wanted to keep the cost model focused on were those things that were very, well, at least relatively easy to quantify, because so many ROIs have factors baked in that are maybe 2 or 3 steps removed from the operational change that is being considered, right? And those things happen. I'll talk about some examples in a minute, but we didn't want to bake that into the math, right? Because then it can cause maybe cognitive dissonance in terms of, is that really going to be the benefit that I get? But what we wanted to keep our cost model focused on were those things that it's very easy to understand exactly how the operational change would be felt in your organization. So I pulled out what I think are kind of those 5 core improvements that we're really reflecting in the model. The faster PO processing, the shipment changing in the invoices, right? That's the automation piece. And iTrade's platform helps with that. EDI helps with that. That type of capability that was critical to making your operation more efficient. The second one, though, is that streamlined contextual negotiations. So when Brett was talking about the vendor management piece of the model, and we had that broken down into PO negotiation and confirmation, and also the PO expediting, what we hear from our customers, and I imagine your experience is similar, is that when they look at their buyer's time in terms of where they are actually focusing most of their effort, it isn't on finding, well, especially pre-2020, it isn't on finding new and better sources. It isn't on negotiating better contracts. It isn't on coming up with process improvement. It was 80% spent on track and trace. It was 80% spent on the whiteboard or the sticky notes that said, hey, what POs should be coming in today? What product should I be receiving? Where? Am I getting it on time? Do I need to change a receiving location? Picking up the phone, talking to all those different parties was the majority of the effort that was being done by these highly trained, 30 plus years experience in the industry buyers. They were, I think Brett used the term shepherding POs, right? They were shepherding. They were a guy with a crook and a herd of sheep and maybe a herd of cats, right? Trying to get them where they needed to go on time. So with that being the core problem that our customers are telling us they have, that's where, for iTrade, we think it's really important to have those proactive expediting alerts. I'll talk about it more in a little bit, but basically taking as much of that effort as possible in automating it. And then of course you end up with the improved order accuracy that comes with that contextual negotiation and the expediting alerts. And then finally, the improved responsiveness. Now, I wanted to point these out because we think these are directly applicable to that cost model. However, there are more things that will be benefits of automating your process than what we are expressly identifying. And this is not an exhaustive list, but these are ones I want to at least take a minute, maybe 4 or 5 minutes to talk about. And this is the value add that comes with the savings in time, because ultimately that model is based on time, right? But what is it that time savings means to me, right? What are those other values that we can get that we're not putting in the model, right? We're not trying to quantify how much you can save by identifying better pricing opportunities, but that is the type of activity your buyers should be engaged in, right? That's the value add to your organization. Where can we save money? Most of the buyers that we start working with are using Excel forecasting models that are about equally complicated as Brett's cost model today. Like he keeps wanting to say, oh, this is very simple. Well, that forecasting process for most of the customers that we start working with is itself that simple. It's an Excel spreadsheet that's got a different maybe different set of cells on it for different SKUs and different products and different categories that people are managing. And it's all very much manual. So they're basically taking a number that's come from a spreadsheet that has probably existed for 5 or 6 years. And maybe once a year is looked at and, hey, is this accurate, right? And then in last year in 2020, we all realized really quickly, hey, they're not accurate and they're not changing. But forecasting is an area that can be improved with the resource savings from a better process. In addition to that, when we talk about an automated process, it's the data that goes with it. That data can be used to reduce shrink, right? By actually looking at product as it comes in, slotting it based on expiration date, and making sure that what goes out to the shelves makes the most sense in terms of maximizing the freshness of products. So you don't end up getting something today and we're first in, first out. We got something today that actually is going to expire before something that was already slotted, but we don't have a mechanism for pushing that out to the stores faster. That means better quality to your customers, less reliance on tribal knowledge. You don't have to count on those 30-year plus experienced people to know how an operation works. Single points of failure are big ones that we hear about. With that tribal knowledge comes the guy who knows how to do this, and if he retires or takes a week off, now we're in trouble. Then there are also some of the hard benefits like cash discounting and rebates. If you don't have good control over your receivables, you may be missing opportunities to get the pricing that you've negotiated or get rebates, right, that you've already negotiated. And then that means at the end of the day, supply chain resilience that comes from automation. And then a big one that we don't hear people talking about, but we think people should, is things like endpoint security. When you've got buyers or when you've got sellers at the supply side that are accustomed to sending attachments to documents and opening them to look at a PO, to look at an invoice, it's just a matter of time until somebody has a sophisticated phishing attack on you and they click an invoice that is actually an executable file, right? Those things are going to happen. They're going to happen more and more if we're not changing our approach to a manual process. We mentioned iTrade solution a couple times, and just in the interest of kind of explaining how we can give you the benefits that we talked about. What the iTrade platform is it isn't just an EDI solution where it's about connecting a buyer and a seller and sending a document back and forth, right? It's not just about sending an 850 and an 855. That's effectively fancy mail, right? That's email to snail mail, right? It's really fast, sure, but it isn't collaborative. It doesn't have a path for communicating. It doesn't have a workflow engine in it and a notification engine to identify expediting challenges or opportunities. So in the upper right, and we're not going to walk through the math on this in the model, but in the upper right, we tried to codify a little bit some of the savings that a company can realize by instituting automation. And in the left column where it just says EDI, that's simply using document transmission. You can save a lot by simply automating that process because you're no longer attaching a PDF and manually sending an order to somebody, right? You're going to have fewer errors because you're eliminating some of the manual keying steps that are involved, right? But the real benefit, the real savings comes from the collaborative piece, because that's where you are now taking the negotiation with your trading partners, the agreeing to a price, the agreeing to a quantity. You're codifying it as part of the ordering process. And that way you're making sure both parties are agreeing to the exact transaction and they're doing it on the actual PO. And then in addition, that's being passed into a dashboard like you can see in the lower right, that is taking all my expediting activities and only showing me proactively where I need to be worried. I don't need 15 sticky notes because what we'll do is we'll automatically float them if a PO hasn't shipped, right? And it should have, because now I'm at risk of that arriving late. Or if it shipped short and somebody sent the product, but it wasn't what it was supposed to be, right? We can react faster. That true collaborative process, that agreeing on exactly what's being bought, what's being sold, means that your errors are not going to go away completely, but be even further reduced, and you're going to save even more time on the reconciliation side. And then again, factors not baked in are you're going to make sure you get your right cash discounts, make sure you get your right rebates, all of those other benefits as well. Proof is in the pudding, right? A stat slide, but this is just some examples of what iTrade customers have done with us. And this doesn't even include kind of on the retail side, especially that I don't want to say low-hanging fruit, but that growth that came about as a result of the market shift last year in the pandemic. These are just numbers over time on our platform of the growth that we've supported without having these huge increases in personnel to manage that process, just to give you some idea about what that looks like. So even if you're not so much afraid of risk, in automating a process, but you're really just thinking about, we have a really aggressive growth strategy. We want to, get to be a major player in our region, a national player, or whatever. A solution like iTrade's is going to help you support that growth as well going forward. All right, now we have had a bunch of questions that have come in. We'll get to the ones that we can in the next 8 minutes, but again, like, as we promised up front, we won't forget to answer these questions. So we'll reach out to you as well. We will send copies of the slide deck. Here's a question about, is collaboration actually used by your customers? What's a use case? Yes, it is. And I think that's interesting because you're probably coming, like for me, a lot of times when I hear the term collaboration, I think it's kind of a buzzword in a lot of ways, right? Like, we need to be collaborative. We need Microsoft Teams, right? Or we need to be collaborative. If we get Slack, then suddenly we're collaborative. Collaboration is a tool. It's a technique. So in iTrade, is collaboration actually used? Absolutely it is. And the way it's used almost universally is in the price and quantity negotiation that is done automatically as part of a purchase order. That collaboration doesn't necessarily require a chat or a communication. It might just be updating a price from 18 per case to 17 per case, clicking the send button. It goes back in real time to the counterparty and they click accept, and now everything is going to balance, right? The price is agreed to on both sides. So that's the most common use case. We do support that with collaboration tools like chat that's associated with contextually with the PO as well. But the most common use case is that negotiation piece. A question on, do you have information to show cost savings for integration on the supplier side? That is a great question. We'll probably reach out to talk to you because it struck me as we were going through this today, that a lot of our numbers, a lot of the what we presented in the model was based more on the buy side. We had some conversation about what those savings are on the supplier side, but we'll follow up with you directly to maybe give you some more data on what those cost savings are. But they are considerable for the same reasons, right? So if we think about our model was talking about PO creation. Well, on the sell side, you're not creating a PO, but you are confirming a PO, right? You are still most likely entering that PO somewhere else in your ERP without integration. So that's going to go away. Another challenge that you have more uniquely on the supply side is that you're more likely to be potentially dealing with multiple different trading mechanisms from your buyers. I mean, that's another benefit with iTrade is we've got thousands and thousands of companies already on our network. So when you join with us, you can help consolidate that and build a more consistent process.
Hey, Mike, just on the onboard, because these things come through the onboarding team, and we're constantly integrating suppliers on our network. And we'll definitely reach out to you to have that in-depth conversation and demonstrate the value of being integrated. But one of the interesting things that we've done, because we've compiled hundreds of billions of dollars of trading volume on our platform over the years, is we've done detailed analytics on our own platform. And these suppliers, if you look at their volume on a trailing 12-month basis before they integrate, one of the interesting things that you'll see is the trailing 12 or the next 12 months after the integration is intact, is their actual trading volumes with their existing trading partners have grown. And what that means is, big buying organizations, they want to do business with suppliers who can take and process the volume of POs that are coming across. And when you become integrated on our network, it enables you to take on just more business just from a pure, administrative standpoint, because you can process things that much more quicker because you're integrated with your back-end system onto our network.
Awesome. Thanks, Brett. At least, I think we can probably get at least two more of these answered. Here's one, consider that the user has to compile his products. This example is coming from a floral company, but has to compile his product like flowers before he can sell it. Are there options available to configure that in the software in our solution, right? Can you make a new product? 100%. So, and that's actually a great point, because one of the omissions that we intentionally left out of our model, just for simplicity's sake, is the fact that within iTrade's platform, one of the core mechanisms that we use for ensuring accuracy and for making sure that at the end of the day that three-way match is perfect, and even prior to that the product you receive is correct, is that we do have an integrated catalog that both buyers and sellers have. They can manage and maintain their own. They can create new products that could be integrated, say, with GDSN to populate that data. But that extends to you as the user, the ability to go in and create a new product. So, doing flower arrangements and compilations, that's one example. Another example that we see on the retail side or on the buy side are things like Fresh to Go, where you have products that you're selling that basically have a menu of ingredients that are needed. You can combine them and consolidate them into one item that encompasses all the ingredients that are necessary, so you can purchase that. So there's a lot of that kind of efficiency that's baked into the iTrade solution that is intentionally baked out of the model that we presented today. But that is a great point, and that is another value that we have in the solution. All right, and then the last one, unless there's one you wanted to grab, Brett, I have the last one that I'll intentionally take is, what do you mean by EDI versus collaboration? And I think that comes from that slide that I'd put, I had a quick summary table about the savings, and I'd made that comparison. Just to elaborate on what that means is that, there are a lot of options out there to trade electronically, and most of them are about using, the GS1 standards for sending documents back and forth between trading partners, right? So there's the EDI 850 purchase order, and what that means is it needs to look like this and have these data elements in it. There's a lot of vans out there, EDI partners, that can just help send those documents back and forth, and that's what I meant by EDI, right? But there's no business layer to that. There is no collaboration engine to that. There's no workflow to that you can use to enforce your business rules. Like, you know, a lot of our retail buyers will not accept an invoice from a supplier unless the 861 has been sent, right? So that they're mandating upfront that we're only going to accept an invoice that matches the receiving advice that we send you, right? That's what I mean by a collaborative platform, and that's what iTrade is a business engine that sits on top of EDI. EDI, yeah, great, we can do that, right? We can send the information, we can send the documents back and forth, but the value from that is very limited if you can't also enforce your own controls, your own process, your own workflow on top of that. All right, we're at the 45-minute after mark. I probably should have put this up sooner. Please feel free. You can reach out to Brett or I directly. Here are our emails down below. You will also be getting a follow-up email from the webinar that will include, you know, a link to the recording if you want to watch us again. You know, some information on the calculator as well. But feel free as well if you wanted to reach out to get Brett's or I's thoughts on any other topic as well. You know, please feel free to do that. Thank you, everybody, for attending. Brett, thank you for taking the time today to kind of present those calculations as well. I appreciate you're doing that for us.
Yeah. I appreciate everybody attending, really enjoyed it, and look forward to hearing from you directly. Like Mike said, you know, don't hesitate to reach out to either one of us directly via email. Happy to have a conversation and dive into some of these topics or any other ones that you have concerning iTrade Network further.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.